Hello, LA. You're up way past your bedtime, aren't you? Hope you've slipped into something comfortable. I know I have.
If there was ever a game to define the term flawed gem, Vampire Bloodlines is the one. Bloodlines is an ambitious title that got rushed out the door in late 2004 during one of the busiest times in gaming. But Vampire Bloodlines did not die a final death. Over the years, people poked away at it, and they looked under the hood and saw what was there and fixed it up. The flaws started to fade away, and its incredible strengths came to the forefront. Its reputation grew over time through word of mouth to build a devoted following, so much so that 15 years later, a sequel was announced. While the gameplay is serviceable but nothing outstanding, the last quarter of the game suffers a noticeable drop in quality. It's a title that the sum being greater than its parts. From its atmosphere, the dark tone that doesn't take itself too seriously, it has some of the best writing and characters around in games. It has one of the greatest voice casting games and one of the greatest soundtracks. It has incredible levels of replayability and choice. Bloodlines is a game like Deus Ex. When you mention it, someone will reinstall it. I'm sure someone watching this video will be doing the same thing, and hey, with it being October, what better time to do so? I first played Bloodlines just over a decade ago, and it's become one of my favorites to revisit. So let's sink our teeth in, my kindred. To note, I am playing with the Plus version of the unofficial patch. This version adds in a lot of extra content that was cut. The basic patch sticks mostly to how the game was at release in regards to content. I'll talk more about the unofficial patch later in the video. How did Bloodlines come together? Troika was a studio founded in 1998 with founders Tim Kaine, Jason Anderson, and Leonard Boyarsky. They were three key developers on the original Fallout. Work began on Bloodlines in November 2001 after the release of its first title, Arcanum. Wanting to get away from more fantasy-based settings and a different perspective, they wanted to go with a first-person perspective. The team felt they had done all they could with isometric viewpoints. They pitched to Activision, who suggested using the Vampire the Masquerade tabletop setting as they had the rights to, and that's what they went with. This proved to be a bit of a double-edged sword. While they did have a well-established IP to work off of, they had to constantly go to the IP owner, White Wolf, to get approval on their decisions. Another challenge was taking this established rule set and turning it into a video game. They wanted to stay faithful to the established roots of the tabletop game, but ensure play was fun for the player. There's many aspects that will fall through the cracks when moving a pen and paper system over to a video game. While they thought about building their own engine after seeing the source engine from Valve in action, they went with that. The main selling point were the facial animations, as the game would be in first person during conversations and every character would have voice acting. However, the source engine was still in development and lacked documentation and stability, something that would cause major issues, but more on that later. Let's start off with the character creation screen. You could either answer some questions, get a suggested clan, or we could pick the clan itself. Let's go through the 7 clans that are available to play as. To note, while I played Bloodlines a number of times over the last decade, this is my first playthrough since getting into the tabletop game. I'm coming into this playthrough with a lot more knowledge of the lore and the world than before. I'm going to be covering some broad strokes of the lore, but if you're looking to explore it, there's always the rulebooks you could check out. For YouTube channels, I'd recommend Outstar and Gentleman Gamer. One clan is the Brujah, the fierce, passionate warriors who are prone to frenzy. Brujahs that will come across in Bloodlines include Smiling Jack, Nines, and Damsel.
What a scene, man! Woo-wee! Then they just plop you out here like a naked baby in the woods. How about that?
Another choice is Gangrel, loners and the closest vampires to nature. Think of them as the equivalent of druids. I didn't realize it at the time, but my introduction to Vampire the Masquerade was through the WWF growing up. In the late 90s, there was a wrestler named Gangrel. That's why White Wolf is mentioned in the opening credits when you booted up a WWF game at the time. Becca is the notable Gangrel we'll come across in Bloodlines.
I haven't been following you per se. We've just coincidentally been at the same places at the same time, for different reasons. So sorry if I unnerved you.
There is Clan Toreador. These are the ones closest to humanity. They love beauty and are social creatures. The most notable Toreador within Bloodlines is Vivi.
I'm like a book. All you have to do is run your finger down my spine and crack me open to see what I'm about.
There's the Tremere clan. They're vampire sorcerers. Strauss is a Tremere that we will encounter within Bloodlines.
Strauss. Maximilian Strauss. I am the regent of this chantry. Welcome.
Next is the Ventru clan. This is the clan I played for this video, which was my first time as a Ventru. They are the leaders, the noble, the wealthy. LaCroix, the Prince of LA, is a Ventru, and we'll be spending a lot of time with him.
There you are. I was informed of your presence in the building.
For a real-life example, Activision CEO Bobby Kotick is a Ventru that others strive to be and how much he gets paid. Now there's 2 more clans I've left to the end here to discuss. This is due to how unique their playthroughs are. These clans are recommended after you've beaten the game before. Firstly, there's the Nosferatu. Due to their hideous appearance, they need to lurk in the sewers and the shadows in order to get around. Your dialogue choices are much more limited as a result.
Meet me at the agreed upon location across from the bar by the underpass. Bring your associate, Mr. Durbin, as it is a two-man job that I am proposing.
Damn, son, I don't mean no offense, but I just gotta ask. You did that to yourself on purpose, right? Some kind of newfangled thing like they do with piercing and tattooing and whatnot? I don't reckon you were born like that, right?
What? Now they're sending the extra uglies to sweep us up.
Getting spotted out in the open can lead to a Masquerade violation, which we'll discuss shortly, and cops won't hesitate to open fire. Gary Golden is one of the game's noticeable Nosferatus.
What? You don't recognize me from the pictures? Gorgeous Gary Golden? Don't tell me you missed Pirate Town or Tap Hotel.
And finally, we have the Malkavian, those touched by madness and insanity. Their dialogue choices are unique, to say the least, and very memorable, very wacky.
What? Oh, man. And you're a goddamn Malkavian, too. Wow. You really are fucked.
However, they also have some incredible insights that others won't get otherwise. Malkavians that we will encounter include Therese and Jeanette.
You smell new, little girl, like fabric softener dew on freshly mowed AstroTurf. Oh, I'm not frightening you, am I, duckling?
Writer Brian Mitsoda mentioned that the Malkavian dialogue was written closer to the end of the project. He found the long hours and sleep deprivation helpful for fleshing out this dialogue. In the initial release, they wanted to include character histories that you could pick, giving boosts and flaws to certain stats, but those were cut for time. However, in the unofficial patch, they were added back in. You have the choice of playing as a man or a woman. This is my first playthrough as a woman. There's a few slight changes here and there with the dialogue, but otherwise it's mostly the same. Then we have our character sheet. This is an RPG after all. Things are broken down to 9 attributes, 12 abilities, and 3 disciplines. One of the biggest challenges that the team found was keeping the core of Bloodlines faithful to the tabletop game, while making adjustments needed to keep the game fun. The tabletop game has 30 abilities, which Troika stripped down to 12 for the game. Each clan has the choice of 3 disciplines, which you could think of as spells, which we could level up to get more choices in regards to what we can use. There is some overlap in some of these disciplines. As a Ventru, I had made plenty use of Fortitude, which can also be used by Gangrels. We don't get experience in Bloodlines through killing enemies, but by making progress, completing, or turning in quests. We could also come across books to boost our stats, assuming you have high enough research, or items that will boost our stats when placed in our inventory. Once we've created our character, we get our intro. What looks to be a Los Angeles one-night stand turns into an embrace. We are made into a vampire by our sire. This is not something that is taken lightly. Our embrace did not get approval by the higher-ups, so our sire is executed. This gathering contains all the key players that we're going to come across in Bloodlines, all with their own goals and ambitions. Our life is spared, and we're then shown the ropes of this new world that we're introduced to. If you previously completed the game before starting a new one, your previous character will be present during this theater scene. As I was capturing footage for a Malkavian character after playing through the game as a Ventru, that's her behind the Anarchs. With that, we talk to Smiling Jack, who will take us through a short tutorial to get us up to speed of how the gameplay is, but life as a vampire. Since we're a fish out of water here, it's 100% fine that we get a lot of exposition on how this new world works, this masquerade around us. It could be a lot to take in, but the game does a great job of doing so. Due to the incredibly strong writing and characterization in Bloodlines, they never feel like a character is just reading a Wikipedia entry to us, something that plenty of games fall prey to. We get their insight and thoughts about any questions we have.
Well, you can still be destroyed, but forget the books and the movies. Garlic, it's worthless. A cross? Pfft, shove it right up their ass. A stake? Only if it catches you in the heart, and then it just paralyzes you. Running water? That's no problem. I bathe. Occasionally.
The loading screens are also used to flesh out the lore and define common terms. Although playing it now, load times are really quick, so read quickly. It would be nice to have an option to hit a key or click to continue once the load is completed. Let's look into the presentation of Bloodlines. While it caused a number of issues in development as they were working with an incomplete engine with little documentation, choosing the source engine from Valve played a large factor in Bloodlines' memorable style. While other titles beyond Valve have made use of the source engine, it pales in comparison to other widely licensed engines like the Unreal Engine. This isn't the first source engine title I've covered on this channel. That honor goes to Dark Messiah. And this likely won't be the last source engine title I cover as well. The facial animations that the source engine can deliver was the key reason for Troika choosing the engine. 15 years later, and these facial animations still put most other games that have come out since then to shame. There's none of that uncanny valley, dead-eye stare. Here, characters pop to life with their facial expressions and animated body language. I will note that's the facial animations that have aged the best. In regards to body movement, most of it is, well, animated, but there's also this one awkward one where they lean away from us with their hands forward. Characters for the most part have memorable designs, and the women are well endowed. Some of the NPCs that walk around will repeat. It's funny to dance in a club and see the same character pop up within close proximity of one another. And on the note of dancing, oh, those dance animations. There's just something so goofy and off about them that they're really memorable. I've tried myself to do the dance, but I can't quite figure it out. You know, after all these years, I'm still surprised no one has capitalized in making a YouTube video on how to do the Bloodlines dance. Surely there must be someone out there who could walk people through on how to do it. Combat animations in third person are mostly fine, nothing special. When walking around hubs, some characters appear to float instead of step when they walk when they're far away from you. It's clear that the team spent most of their time on the facial animations and were source delivered at its best. Do also recall they were making use of an alpha version of the engine, which still had a ways to go in regards to development. And another note about Source Engine, this is prior to when the engine allowed for reflections in mirrors. In the world of Vampire the Masquerade, vampires do cast a reflection in mirrors, with the exception of the La Sombra clan. They are not present in Bloodlines. Based on this decision, all characters have voice dialogue. You can make a strong argument beyond a few outlying cases that Vampire Bloodlines is the best voice acting ensemble in the game, especially for its major characters. They brought in a list of heavy hitters in the voice acting space, and each one brings their A game with it. Courtney Taylor, Gray Delisle Griffin, James R.L. Taylor, John DiMaggio, Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, Nika Fuderman, Phil Lamar, Robin Atkins Downs, Steve Blum, just to name a few. You've all heard these voices in some shape or form in other games, shows, or movies, and here they bring their A game. So you have this incredible facial animations, amazing voice actors with excellent voice direction. To complete this package, you need a strong script and dialogue to work with. And while game writing frequently falls short of other mediums, Bloodlines is one of those standouts. What we end up with here are some of the most memorable characters in games, even those who we just spend a little bit of time with, and even just minor characters. You can thank Brian Mitsoda for a vast majority of the game dialogue. He was involved right from the beginning of the project. The outline of the plot with the new prince, tension among the factions, the sarcophagus were put in place prior to him stepping into the role. So to paraphrase an interview in regards to his writing process, Brian mentioned that he doesn't like NPCs to just be standing around as if their lives begin when the character starts talking to them and ends when the player leaves. Characters are the protagonists of their own game, from their own perspective. It's adding in what these characters want, what they think of the player, why they're standing around, and how they're sizing up or trying to take advantage of the player. Over 15 years later, it's still really disappointing how few games manage to tackle this feeling that NPCs aren't just quest givers, but protagonists of their own story. One example in games I've covered on this channel in the past are the Eidos Montreal Deus Ex games. The writing also hits a bullseye with the tone it goes for. There's a dark edge, and the game does tackle some very dark subject matter at points, but doesn't take itself too seriously and has some of the better humor I've seen conveyed in the game.
Writer's such a tarnished term, you know what I mean? It's like every other guy says he's a writer, right? Like, you write a letter, you're a writer, you know? It's like, what I do, that's screenwriting. Like, I encapsulate the essence of excellent film in my scripts, all right? Like, I'm like a blacksmith with pens, all right? I'm a welder of montage.
After all, Vampire the Masquerade tabletop game was released in the early 90s, and very much has that Gen X feel to it. Could have been very easy for things to fall into edgy territory, but the game never falls into that trap. And of course there's the radio show The Dead of Night.
Did you miss me? Judging by the way the board's lit up, I'd say you couldn't live without me. You make me feel so desirable, LA.
It's one of those things that helps add to the incredible atmosphere and help flesh out the world around us. I did do a poll on what were people's favorite Bloodlines girl. Therese and Jeanette won by a wide margin, which didn't surprise me, but I was a bit let down on how little votes Deb got. Even if we don't get to see her, there's just something about that voice. The game does hint that she is kindred as well. I wouldn't be surprised that she's a Toreador.
Sorry, Roger, the only one that gets to give out their number on this show is me. And if anyone was thinking of asking what I'm wearing, that number again is 323-KL5-KTRK.
And whoever made the site, debofnight.com, thank you. Talk about having something nice on the background. We have fantastic voice acting, a great script, but what also makes Bloodlines such an auditory treat is the music. I'm not sure if it's my favorite game soundtrack ever, but it's right near the top. What Rick Schaefer composed here is something truly magical, especially that Hollywood theme. and I've only been to LA a couple times in my life and just briefly passing through. But I am familiar with the city, whether through films, books, the news, and the tracks do an amazing job of capturing that sleaze, that seedy nights of Los Angeles in such a perfect way. Now for that music that plays at the menu, they wanted to get the song Angel by Massive Attack but couldn't get the rights, so they just made their own version heavily inspired by it. So many great tracks here. There's that one that happens when you get into combat in certain areas that I always like to sing along with. The licensed tracks in Bloodlines were done by Activision, not the team itself, but they did a fantastic job here. I mean, say what you will about Activision, but the Tony Hawk games prove that they're really good when it comes to selecting songs for games. Well, I wish I could play them without getting copyright strikes. You know how YouTube is. You do know these tunes, especially the one in the Asylum. You know, there's also one song that would have fit in the game well, not just for its mood and tone, but the song itself, that being the song Taxicab Messiah by Kidney Thieves. If you play Deus Ex Invisible War, you'll know this song, but that gets into spoilers and I'll talk about it more later. Bloodlines makes use of hub-based worlds, with 4 different hubs. From there we'll be taken to various areas for various quests. As great as these areas mostly are, I do feel that perhaps they should have scaled some things back here and focused on 1 or 2 hubs and fleshed them out further. Even if there's not a ton of people walking around and there's a lot of characters repeating, there's just something with so much care and craft that are put into these areas. It all comes together in this dark and dingy LA, to the music, the background noise, the source engine. There's also a je ne sais quoi factor here that I haven't been able to quite put my finger on why it all comes together so well, but it's there. Although on that point it is kind of amusing that there's going to be some quests where we're sent to do something when it's pretty much right across the street. I know we're the new vampire on the block and elders like to use those below them, but cut us some slack. These areas are just full of love and craft, full of things to do, people to talk to, places to see. At the beginning of the game and for good stretches of it, the game does a great job of giving you multiple ways to go about quests. You could use combat, you could use stealth, you could hack, you could use dialogue. You have multiple ways into places. It does a great job of replicating that tabletop experience. When it comes to stealth, I've never found the stealth detection system that pops up overly helpful and intuitive. And especially for this playthrough, because I barely made use of stealth. I usually just ran up and started hitting things. Although stealth is great for instant kills when sneaking up behind enemies, with unique kill animations depending on the weapon that you have. Melee combat is all done in third person, depending on your build, and can last you well to the end of the game. You could do different swings by hitting a direction as you click away, but I didn't find myself using it that much. Mostly it was just me clicking away. When it came to guns, they had the struggle of getting the gun balance right. Again, trying to stay true to the tabletop while making adjustments for a video game. Now, guns are something you could hold off for quite a while, at least until Hollywood or so, before you really want to put some points into firearms. And our disciplines, or spells, can be a lot of fun to mix and match. And I really discovered this as my first time playing as a Ventru that I got a pretty broken build. The game can be pretty easy to cheese depending on the clan that you choose. For Lady Ventru here, she was running around soaking up damage like a machine. As for disciplines, I invested heavily into Fortitude, which increases defenses, and Presence, which reduces the number of stats of enemies. And our mana is our blood pool. It slowly drains over time and drains from our use of disciplines. So depending on where you are, you have a few options to refill your blood as a vampire. If you're in a Masquerade zone like the Hubs, you have to be discreet with your feeding. Feed on someone in an alley when no one else is around. Thanks to this kind of lady in the downtown section, as she would always seem to walk through this 90-degree alley at just the right time. Now if you get caught, there will be consequences hiding from the cops, but unless you're really screwing up, this won't be a huge issue. If you do run out of blood, depending on a number of factors, your character will go into a frenzy, which the game takes over and gets your character to feed. Masquerade be damned. Unless you're really fucking up and losing humanity or violating the Masquerade, you really have to go out of your way in order to do so. It's one of those carryovers from the tabletop game that could have been used a bit more tweaking if they wanted to have greater consequences to the player. You could also buy blood packs, and in combat zones, you're free to feed and kill them off with feeding with no consequences. So now I'm going to go through each of the hub areas and give various thoughts on various points of the game, so we're getting into spoiler territory here as a warning. Arguably the most memorable characters in the game are Therese and Jeanette, even though they're barely in the game. In the longer quest line, we have the Ocean House Hotel. I've done a whole video on this quest. While now I could run through the area very quickly because I know its tricks, it's easy for me to understate just how good of a short little horror ride it is. The first time I played Bloodlines, I was aware of the quest and its reputation, and got lucky with playing it around 1 in the morning with the lights off, and that was a trip. It's a masterstroke of horror design, and I'd love to see Troika take a crack at a horror-focused title. Besides Grout, who we'll get to later, and we only get here through his audio entries, the only other Malkavians we'll encounter throughout the game, besides a possible player character, is Therese and Jeanette. For someone who's played thousands of roles and bills herself as the voice of your childhood, this is my favorite role by Grey Delisle Griffin. How she plays both characters, and especially the scene where you talk them down. When I first played this, and when I walked in and realized that they're the same person, it's a great moment, the kind of well duh twist that's extremely obvious in hindsight.
You. I'm really sorry it had to end this way. I truly am. You seemed promising, but don't listen to her. She'll kill us both. Save me and I'll help you find Bertram, I swear. Shut up, Jeanette!
Now if you're playing as a Malkavian, there's additional dialogue that happens before where it hints at this.
Janice, let's see. Isn't that a two-faced Roman god? Of course, you're right. You just happened to meet the prettier face first.
To me, this section of dialogue and our choices here is the highlight of Bloodlines, and one of the most memorable dialogue encounters I've come across in any game. It is quite disappointing afterwards, we really don't have these kind of dialogue battles, for better lack of a term, in Bloodlines of talking someone down. We have to tread lightly here if we want them to coexist with one another. And also the thing about this scene is it could have gone really wrong. This gets into some very dark subject matter here about them being molested by her father and her two halves.
You'd love the world to think you're a saint. When you thought I was asleep, I used to hear Father come in at night. I heard him whisper how much he loved you in your ear before he... Don't finish that sentence, or you're dead!
This makes that painting the room that much more unsettling. There's a reason that this kind of subject matter doesn't get covered often. In the hands of an unskilled writer, it could be a cheap device and fall apart. Now, that's not the case here. And in the hands of bad direction or a voice actor up to task, this could have not hit the mark. Especially when you have the same actor bouncing back and forth with two halves of the same character. But Grey brings her A game here and knocks it out of the park. There's a reason she's never short of work. Therese and Jeanette don't fall under the fishmalk territory. Fishmalk is a term for a stereotypical Malkavian who plays wacky. If you've ever played the tabletop game, you definitely had someone at your sessions like this. With my Venture playthrough, I was so certain I did all the correct steps to get them to cooperate with one another, but I fucked it up somehow. You have to take very specific steps in order to do so. Thanks to chat, when I did a stream of capturing footage for Malkavian Nosferatu gameplay, I was able to get correct this time around, and I think that's the first time I've actually got them to coexist. In the case of 6 Degrees of Grey Delisle, Grey played a prominent role in another role-playing game that launched a month later in December 2004, a title that was also rushed out the door. A title that had adoring fans to help patch the game back together over the years. A game that's become one of the most beloved RPGs of all time, that being Knights of the Old Republic 2, where she plays the Handmaiden. This isn't my first video where Grey Delisle has made an appearance in. She also played Jean in Bayonetta. Now, the Ocean Lighthouse gets a lot of praise and good reason for its horror, but it's not the only quest in the game that does a great job of making you feel out of your element or uncomfortable. There's this one with this prosthetic man, which can be pretty goofy with his voice acting, but going further and further into his lair is quite unsettling. Although really, couldn't he be a little more subtle about all this? Like keep all the creepy stuff all the way in the back as opposed to just being behind the waiting room door? With the side quests and the main quests we get here, it really fleshes out the lore in a natural way. We get introduced to the Thin Bloods, the Kuei Jin, ghouls. There's tons of lore they had to work with, and they picked some great topics to focus in on. And with the exception of a short little side quest in Hollywood, we're mostly a blank slate for our characters, so we could really get immersed into it. You could tell the way that things are connected and how tightly packed it is, that Santa Monica is where they spent most of their time on. The first main quest, again, the Explosives, is a great example of showing how many ways you could play through an area. Where it's dialogue, you could use stealth, you could use combat. The last part here of the main quest for Santa Monica gives you a lot of options. While not dialogue heavy, there's a number of ways you could get into this area and what you want to do with it. Although for my playthrough, I just went in soaking that damage like a motherfucker and making my way through. While I didn't keep track of time, I do think most of the game is spent in the downtown area. It's a much larger area, it's more spread out, but there's a lot more to do. This is where you could go talk to the Anarchs, those amongst kindred who want more freedom in how they live, versus the Camarilla with the Prince, upkeeping the Masquerade in a more strict manner. As well, we'll get more time dealing with the Sabbat who we touched upon in the last hub, those who don't care to follow the Masquerade and just want to fuck shit up mostly.
Brother Canker, they call me. High Lord in the diseased halls of the dead. Look around you. The blood. The bloated bodies. The maggot-ridden mortal shells. These are the signs. The coming of a new age.
When I got into the tabletop game, reading through the books, it's crazy how much is devoted to them and their various factions. Here they keep it fairly straightforward. The last act is a great bar where you could talk with the Anarchs. Now it gives you some good advice that maybe they should have hammered in a bit more, especially once you get to the backstretch of the game.
3, the Camarilla's full of shit. 4, watch your back, always. And lastly, learn how to fight. Because a speech ain't gonna save your ass when you're staring down the barrel of a shotgun.
There's something so adorable and enduring about Damsel getting so angry. In another case of a voice actor veteran in the gaming space, Courtney Taylor knocks it out the park. It wasn't until this playthrough that I finally realized who Damsel reminded me of. She reminds me of a grown-up Spinelli from the show Recess.
Yes, only a fool would try it. A fool with a fistful of luck!
We told him Nines didn't do it! That son of a... And that Quajan bitch! If I ever get my hands on her, I'll tie her eyelashes to her ass hairs and bowl her ass into a car compactor. Demon! Whore!
Of course I gotta talk about Chunk. I could devote a whole section to this character. He's such a doofus, yet likable security guard. We all know a Chunk in our life, and in some cases we should all be more like a Chunk in our life. He's such a treat to have around. There's something so endearing about his upbeat manner and attitude and his sheer ignorance of the world that's going on around him.
Yeah, I get that all the time. The name goes back to my football days. Actually, my fantasy football days at the Stationarium. That was this office supply outlet mall I used to watch. Hey, you kids! No skating in the parking lot! That was me.
There's another club here that's pretty great, and Venus the bartender, she's a great lady for a couple of reasons. There's a pretty funny dialogue here poking fun at Republicans.
I'm going to need details, so I know whether to pour a Hail Mary or a highway to hell. Really? I don't think I've got anything in this place that's going to wash away that sin.
This was during the heyday of the Bush administration, after all. I don't really care what your political stance is, but you gotta admit, it was a pretty funny little jab. Remember when you could do that to either side of the political spectrum and have people not spaz out? World before social media. Follow me on Twitter, everyone. One side quest highlight is the flesh-eating vampire. She's voiced by Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, who Silent Hill fans will know as the vocalist for many tunes from the series.
Real terror is not the sight of death. It is the fear of death. What is the fear of death? Terror of the unknown. Is it these eyes you peer into? No, I am not the unknown. You and I are closer kin than you and it were.
The main plot drives forward with the MacGuffin that shows up, the sarcophagus that's been found just offshore. The sarcophagus may contain an antediluvian, an extremely powerful vampire, a sign that the end times may be near. This is what drives the main quest, getting the sarcophagus to LaCroix and how to open it. Of course, LaCroix and the Camarilla aren't the only ones who want to get their hands on the sarcophagus. As the game goes on, we'll learn more about it, and why "don't open it" is a phrase well known amongst the Bloodlines fandom.
About the sarcophagus? Don't open it. Whatever you do, do not open the Ankaran sarcophagus.
Those with a lot to say usually have something on their mind. Don't open it.
One of the mainline quests will take us to Grout's mansion. He's a notable Malkavian in the LA scene. While it's very combat-focused, it's not too difficult, and it's great learning about Grout and his descent into madness as a Malkavian. There's a really interesting theory I came across in regards to Grout. So throughout the game we'll get emails sent to us, some about quests, some as junk mail, but every once in a while we'll get these really cryptic messages from an unknown sender. There's a theory that gives a pretty convincing case that Grout is the one sending these messages, that he faked his death at the mansion. After all, he should have turned to ashes instead of leaving a skeleton behind. A lot of these insights from these emails can be from a Malkavian who has those deep insights that other clans can't see. I'll provide a link to the theory in the description, as it's an interesting read and makes a strong case that it is him. Afterwards, we're off to Hollywood. I'd say it's my favorite hub, not due to the quests, but due to the music. I mentioned earlier that beyond a short little bit in Hollywood, our character is mostly a blank slate. So it's here we run to someone from our past life prior to our embrace.
Gosh, is that you? Everyone was worried sick about you. When you didn't show up and didn't call and nobody knew anything about what happened to you, we thought you were dead. Are you okay? You know what? Never mind. We have to help you.
It's a short little conversation, but a stark reminder of what we've recently just given up. It's one of those moments that have really stuck with me over the years, and a game chock full of memorable moments. This is the small sub, it's mostly just a straight way forward, but it's just that music, the atmosphere, it just comes together so nicely. Now let's talk about Vivi. Good lord, that voice.
Isn't this better? You and me alone for just a little while. Away from jihad and the nonsense and the dangers. Just the two of us. I don't want to spoil the moment, but there's a reason I needed to speak to you alone.
So here's another voice actress veteran who just knocks out of the park here. Now, I didn't realize it at the time, even though I was playing a ton of it when I first played Bloodlines, but that's her as the Zerg announcer in StarCraft 2.
Would you? I think it might be a little much to ask.
Our allies' face is threatened.
I've got a girl, Misty. She's divine.
There's also another funny line here poking fun at the Bush administration.
It was about secret societies and creatures that found themselves dealing with inner...
Again, remember when we could just joke about this stuff and not have everyone spaz out over it? Good times. We need to get in contact with the Nosferatu who are hiding, so we start a fairly long quest line that leads us to a creepy house in the hills, a very unsettling character, the Samitse. Samitse, or however you pronounce it. Well, let's see what videos have to say about this pronunciation.
I pronounce it as chimiste, which is like, sounds a little bit Spanish.
Cimiche.
Yes.
Today's word is zimishe. And today's word is zimishe.
They're one of the other 13 clans, and hey, that is Steve Blum. And one of the more amusing things in the game is if you listen to Devon Knight, at some point he does call in and it feels like he's shitposting.
Caller, you're whiling away the evening with the Deb of Night.
Good evening, Deb.
Yes, I think that's implied by the title of the show.
Do you ever worry, Deb, that the world is going to end?
I haven't felt that way since Brad Pitt got married.
Do you have any idea how insignificant you are? When they start devouring the world, you will be but a bloodstain on their capes.
I bet you say that to all the girls.
There is a red star in the night sky. The blood of mortals and the blood of ages, all will be consumed. They are coming. These are the final nights.
Okay, well, good luck in the next election, Senator.
Now, I can't find anything if Troika ever had the intention of allowing you to join the Sabbat. Seeing how they had the kitchen sink design philosophy, I wouldn't be surprised if they planned at some point. But there is a mod available that allows you to join the Sabbat here instead of killing Andre. That said, I haven't played it myself. And then we get to the infamous sewer section. In an industry where sewer level has a bad connotation, this one is especially egregious. Now, this is one of the reasons why I do like playing the Plus patch, is you could skip most of the sewers. However, where you could skip the sewers is in such an odd place. Why couldn't they just put it right at the beginning where we started? Is there something with the engine that doesn't allow that to be the case? Because if you're not aware of it, the game doesn't really bring attention to it. At this point, if you're not putting points to the firearms, now's the time. A more fantastic atmosphere, Chinatown, the last of the hubs, you can really tell this is where they started to run out of time. There are fewer quests, there's not as much polish, and you don't have as much decision making in regards to these quests. In a way, it kind of reminds me of playing a tabletop game where the GM forgot he had a session plan, so he just made a long stretch of combat encounters. We get to meet the Kuei Jin leader, Ming Zhao. They're known as the Vampires of the East, although they are quite different in how they work.
We are supernatural. That does not mean we are like yourself. We are beings returned through the second breath for a purpose.
The Giovanni Mansion is quite a bit of fun. Giovanni is another one of those 13 clans that, though we can't play, do pop up in the game. Afterwards, we go to raid the Society of Leopold, and this is where you could tell the game really starts to drop in regards to quality. Now, some of my favorite and some of the best regarded games do have these back sections of a quality drop. Dark Souls, for example, in the last half or so, is easy to point to. System Shock 2 after the Von Braun as well. Vampire Bloodlines for the last quarter-fifth of the title has a significant quality drop. Even with multiple playthroughs throughout the years, sometimes I just get frustrated and just use God mode or no clip to rush through these things. Now here is a Ventrue who is basically the Terminator and just soaked up insane amounts of damage. But once you're past the Giovanni Mansion, it's pretty much an all-combat stretch. Sure, you could stealth, but you really want to invest in some kind of combat. One little break that does happen here is going to Fine Nines and dealing with a werewolf. In a game where you basically curb stop everything in your way, this is a nice change how the tables turned on us, where we just have to run and hide for a few minutes. Now you can't kill the werewolf by squishing them with the opening, but I've never been able to do this successfully. Now we're at the end of the game where we get our choices, the Kuei Jin, the Camarilla, the Anarchs, or ourselves. The game has been building up to this moment in regards to the sarcophagus and everyone who wants it, but also it feels like a case of where they ran out of time to make a compelling case for who to side with. One game that does the decide on what flawed faction to choose really well is Fallout New Vegas. There's a good reason that over a decade later, there's still much debate on which choice is the best for the future of the Mojave. Had Bloodlines had more time to develop, I'm sure the game would have done much better in regards to giving more thought to your decision. While the Camarilla are in order, LA has been an anarchic state for a number of years. Maybe it's time for things to return. But what about these Kuei Jin? After all, Ming does come clean to us about how she's in cahoots with LaCroix.
LaCroix saw an opportunity to rid himself of two problems: a hardened rebel leader and a problematic primogen in one fell stroke. And as you can see, I was integral to his plan.
For this playthrough, I did the independent run, not trusting anyone, because it's totally worth it for one moment that happens later. We make our way through the Kuei Jin Fortress, and boy, this fight with Ming Zhao, good luck. In the past, I've thrown the towel on a number of these runs and just turned on God mode just to get past this fight. Even with my overpowered Ventrue, who just absorbed incredible levels of damage, this one took quite a while. Finally, going after LaCroix, we make our way up the tower. Now we have the choice. Do we open it, or do we not open it? Now, I remember when I first played this, in the section where we raid the Society of Leopold, we're there to find an archaeologist, and we have a really interesting conversation with him.
Well, the markings on the sarcophagus seem to hint that it is from sometime between 1050 and 800 BC. The goddess on the outside of the sarcophagus was Lamashtu. In Assyrian myth, Lamashtu was an evil demoness who preyed on humans. Many people cite her as the mother of vampire myth, and the engravings on and found around the sarcophagus portray a regal figure drinking the blood of his enemies.
There's something that seems to be really powerful in here, or at least gives the impression of. Because if you do the right thing and not open it and leave it to LaCroix to... surprise!
In a few seconds, it will be all mine. Power!
Smiling Jack was trolling the shit out of everyone. A little bit of assistance. And why is the independent ending worth it? Well, there's this one moment.
Hell, I don't think any of us could have done LaCroix like that. Shit, where you going? Hey, hear me out. We could use someone like you.
So as we wrap up Bloodlines, let's talk about the cab driver and our character. So if you go by the rules of the tabletop game, with our blood pool, we're an 8th generation vampire, which is really powerful. Looking at the White Wolf wiki, LaCroix himself is estimated as an 8th generation, with Smiling Jack as 10th generation. Kane is 1st generation. At the time of the release, generations were going up to around the 12 to 14 range. Now, to be clear, Bloodlines doesn't really get much into the generations. They do play fairly loose with the rule set. So to have someone that's a 7th generation Cyrus without mentioning anything doesn't sit right. And LaCroix mentions that they were an upstanding member of the society. So what happened then? Well, we have to consider the presence of the cab driver.
I drive people to their destination. That is who I am. Remember, wherever we go, it is the blood of Cain which makes our fate. Farewell, vampire.
So the game never outright says so, but if you look at game files, the Malkavian discussion with the cab driver, the talk with the seer on the beach, the cab driver is Cain. Cain being the OG vampire cursed by God when he slew his brother Abel. And that could help explain why we're so fucking powerful. He's been mucking around with things in the background. Although granted, we're pretty much the only one out there doing things, so that's a good reason why we collected so many experience points. But still, Cain did play a factor in making sure we had a bit more power. Since getting more into the tabletop game, I'm not sure exactly how I feel about the cab driver being Cain. I mean, he does work in mysterious ways. Him getting involved with everything at this level feels like it wouldn't be his style, but then again, when you're the first vampire, you could do whatever you want. I mentioned earlier there's a licensed track that was featured in Deus Ex Invisible War that would have been really great here, and that's the song Taxicab Messiah by Kidney Thieves. I mean, the song title itself feels really good, and the lines, "My God is weird, my God is scary, my God paints a pretty picture," perfect fit for this game.
Hey, mess around, buddy, I'm talking to you. You don't really talk much, do you? Hey, it happened just like you said. They never even knew what hit them. Threw that sarcophagus out there and they just tore each other up trying to get to it. And the kid, worked out all right, huh?
Remember, wherever we go, it is the blood of Cain which makes our fate. Farewell, vampire.
So now, how did Vampire Bloodlines go to have such an undying legacy? The game was ahead of its time in regards to being released unfinished. Activision was getting very impatient and wanted the game out now. However, due to their contract with Valve, they couldn't release Bloodlines until Half-Life 2 came out. So it was released the same day as Half-Life 2, November 16th, 2004. Now you'd think they'd pick a better date, considering Half-Life 2 is one of the most anticipated games of all time. Looking at what Activision launched that quarter, they did have Tony Hawk's Underground 2 and Call of Duty Finest Hour. This was still a few years before Call of Duty became a mammoth series. So I guess Bobby couldn't wait a few more months and wanted to have something else out that quarter. Not only that, when you look at November 2004 for video games and that fall in general, you can make a strong case for it being the greatest period of quality title releases. If you Google November 2004 in gaming, one of the first results is an article from Kotaku on why November 2004 might be one of the greatest months in gaming history. Now, as wrong as Kotaku gets most things, I don't have any issues with this one. While 1998 is widely cited as the best year in gaming, you can make a strong case for 2004, especially what came out in November 2004, which saw Counter-Strike Source, Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, EverQuest 2, Halo 2, Metroid Prime 2, Need for Speed Underground 2, Half-Life 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, World of Warcraft, just to name a few. The tail end of October saw the release of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. A number of these titles are highly ranked on the best games of all time list and sold an incredible number of copies. So how did Bloodlines do? Well, it sold around 70,000 copies. Troika received its final death in February of 2005. They tried pitching projects to other publishers, but no dice. And just looking back, you'd think Activision would realize that a niche title like Bloodlines should have waited until the first quarter of 2005. Now, this time frame did see a number of noticeable releases, but it wouldn't have got as lost in the shuffle as it did in November 2004. Plus, this would have given the team more time to work on the title. It was possible at the time to encounter some bugs that made the game unbeatable. Within a few months, fan patches were starting to emerge. One Werner Spall, an analytical chemist at the University of Munich, known in the community as West 5, took over patching duties early on as he had experience with modding games prior. And to this day, he's still working on it. He pops up everywhere in discussions, Steam discussions, GOG forums, RPG codex. And to be fair, while he is the project lead, there have been a number of people over the years who have contributed to the project. So much content has been restored that eventually the patch split into two versions. Firstly, there's the basic patch. This focuses on what came with the game at launch. Then there's the Plus patch that adds and cut content that saw fans add in voiceovers and construct maps from what was left over in the game files. And as time went on, word spread about Bloodlines, gaining an extremely devoted following. Steam Spy shows its sales between 500,000 and 1 million on Steam. That's a wide stretch, but shows the long tail and shelf life as this game keeps selling and selling. So much so that in early 2019, after many rumors, Vampire Bloodlines 2 was announced. Okay, so let's talk about the dumpster fire that has been Bloodlines 2. Let's try to piece things together. In 2015, Paradox Interactive purchased White Wolf and all its IPs, which include Vampire the Masquerade. Hardsuit Labs, the developer of Seattle, pitched to Paradox. Creative director Kai Clooney, a friend of Bloodlines writer Brian Mitsoda, brought him on board to write for the sequel, and they got the green light. So they got off on the right foot, bringing one of the writers who played such a critical role of the original. Good stuff. They also contracted Chris Avlon, one of the better writers in the industry, on the project. Rick Schaefer was also being brought back to work on the soundtrack. So, great start, right? And sure, there were some of the modern-day gaming hiccups, like needing charts to figure out pre-order editions, or bringing in some other writers who want to push more of that current year sloppy shoehorn writing and we've seen pop up. But hey, if you have Brian and Chris running the show, I think most of that will be kept to a minimum. The game was set for release in early 2020, and after seeing the gameplay reveal that we got that year, it didn't surprise me the game got delayed, so it looked like it needed a lot of time left. And then we had COVID, so there was even more delays. And then in mid-2020, Brian Mitsoda and director Kai Clooney were canned by Hardsuit with no explanation. Around this time frame, Chris Avlon was Me Too'd, which resulted in his work being removed. In February of this year, Paradox removed Hardsuit Labs as the developer of the project, and has found another studio to finish the game. What studio that is has yet to be announced. And when I was writing out the script, Paradox announced the cancellation of several unannounced titles. And to be honest, I was surprised that Bloodlines 2 wasn't cancelled in this announcement as well. So if we will see the game if ever they decide to start from scratch, or what they'll use, that's really up in the air. There's been some other stuff popping up about the game, so let's dig a bit deeper. In July of this year, Chris Avellone released a blog post titled "What the Fuck Happened to Bloodlines 2?" Chris had been silent since he got Me Too'd the year before, but a month before this blog, he ended his silence, fighting back against the accusations and lawyering up. If you do want to learn more about this case, I do recommend a video of the exoneration of Chris Avellone that looks into the allegations. I am a big fan of Avallone's work for years, and since fighting back against his Me Too allegations, he definitely has more of a don't give a fuck attitude. I'm mostly going to take his word here on his experiences with Bloodlines. Chris wasn't booted from the project like the media reported it. He was contracted for the project that ran from 2016 to mid-2018. He wrote a number of major characters and side missions. These were removed after the allegations emerged. Chris says that none of the staff they worked with at the time are still at the company. It's not clear at this point if his work will be brought in or how much of Brian's material will be used. He also notes that Hardsuit wasn't a studio with much experience in working on RPGs. Another post I came across from a thread on RPG Codex pointed to a Russian site. Running it through Google Translate, it might be a little bit off, but does give some interesting insights to what's going on at Hardsuit Labs. Hardsuit Labs kept quiet that during this time frame development, they're also doing a number of outsourcing services. Some of these include engineering support and porting support for numbered titles like Gears of War 4, Bioshock Collection, and Crash Bandicoot 4. However, this information wasn't featured at first, and this can be verified by using the Wayback Machine. So looking at this information, it might be very possible that Hardsuit kept this information quiet from their publisher Paradox. They want to have something else to show potential clients. So instead of devoting all their resources to Bloodlines 2, they spread themselves too thin. They hired staff that makes sense for engineering support or reporting, but not in development of the game. They used it to build out their portfolio, and when Bloodlines 2 went tits up, they could show possible clients what they've been working on. I don't know, maybe they should have just focused on Bloodlines 2, because now they're known as the studio who fucked up Bloodlines 2. And there's still a whole lot that we don't know. A lot of this is just rumors at this point, but looking at timelines, it's not like they were forced to rush this one out. It seems like Hardsuit Labs might be given enough rope to hang themselves. So if you have any hopes for Bloodlines 2, I really hope you keep them in check. Whatever studio gets to take control of the project now has a monumental task ahead of them. To that I say, I would not want to be in your shoes. So if you're a fan of Bloodlines, a fan of this world of Vampire the Masquerade, what does the future of the series hold in store beyond Bloodlines 2? What can you do? Well, you could always replay Bloodlines. It's one of the most replayable games around. Play a different clan, check out some of the mods, like the clan-based mods. I haven't checked out any of them, but they seem to have a positive reputation, and something I might look at in a future video. There's also the tabletop game, although if you're getting into it, stick with the older versions. For me, I played the 20th Anniversary Edition. The most recent edition, 5th, is a trash fire. Go look into some of the controversies surrounding it. There's a reason that Paradox said to White Wolf, yeah, you're not working on this again. It's also full of a lot of that current year writing that's gone shoehorned into a lot of work over the last few years. There's a reason that the character Rudy has become a bit of a meme and a joke amongst the community. A lot of the writing here feels like someone who was raised on the diet of Twitter and Tumblr. If you like tabletop shows like Critical Role, there's LA by Night that's now 5 seasons in. I only watched it briefly in preparation for taking part in the tabletop game, but it's well done with a great cast and a fantastic GM running the show. Plus, a number of characters from Bloodlines show up. In 1996, there was a short-lived show based on Vampire the Masquerade called Kindred the Embrace. It only had 8 episodes that aired on Fox, but you could find it on YouTube. There are a couple of visual novels, Coteries in New York and Shadow of New York, that came out the last couple years. They have mostly positive reviews on Steam, so they might be worth looking into if you're into those kind of visual novels. There was the recently released Battle Royale Blood Hunt that's free to play. I'm not into these kind of games, and I'm assuming if you're a fan of the channel, neither are you, but hey, it is there. Currently sits at mixed reviews on Steam. You know, gunning down each other in the streets doesn't seem like the best way of keeping the Masquerade intact. Finally, there's Swan Song, which is set to release in early 2022. It's billed as a narrative RPG. Looking at the team's other previous work, The Council, which sits a very positive on Steam reviews, seems like a mixture of Telltale and BioWare dialogue. The Gentleman Gamer, one of the channels I recommended if you want to learn more about the lore of the series, is a co-writer on the title. So you can make what you will of the future of this franchise. Make your own stories with the tabletop game. Give more clans a run. Try out some of the mods. There's always something new I discover each time I come back to Bloodlines, and it's extremely replayable. And if Bloodlines 2 ever sees the light of day, or, well, I guess unleashed into the night's the better term, keep your expectations in check. If it's anything above unsalvageable dumpster fire that even fans can't fix, I'll be surprised.